Okay, let's get started on GED, English Language Arts, reading, Domain 1. And this is reading for comprehension. Okay, we're going to talk about events, plots, characters, and settings. And lesson 1 is about the basics of how texts work. Okay, let's talk about the plot and ordering events. You might have seen online, no spoilers. Avengers Infinity War was spoiled all over Reddit, Facebook, online games, etc. So we have Thanos over there on the right. So what is a spoiler? That's when you give away the plot. So what's the plot? The plot is the sequence of events that occurs in a story. A plot involves conflict and some resolution of that conflict. In John Wick, a hitman comes out of retirement after something bad happens, kills a bunch of people, and ultimately the guy who did it. That's the plot. Carlito's Way has basically the same plot. So do many other films. I'd recommend seeing that too, if you haven't, by the way, with Al Pacino. That's a really good film. Flashbacks in a film like Memento and other films where the plot of sequence of events may not necessarily mirror chronological time. So that's important. That's not really on the test that much, but flashbacks may occur in the plot differently than they would have occurred in chronological time. That means the day depicted in a flashback may be the day before the rest of events. Okay? So when we're ordering events, sometimes that can be a little confusing. Usually there's not flashbacks on the exam or that many, so you don't really have to worry about it, but just in case, I just wanted to bring it up. Okay, so the 5 W's in characters and settings. Who, what, why, when, and where, and sometimes how. The who in the text is the characters. How do they feel? When you're reading a text, you need to think, well, who are the main characters? Then you need to think, what's going on? That's the plot. Why is that going on? That's the motivation. The motivations of the characters matter. Why is a character doing something? Think about that. What's motivating them? When is that going on? That's part of the setting. Where is that going on? That's also part of the setting. So we'll see shortly when we talk in the guided practice about a scene from Great Expectations. You're going to see a lot of setting. Okay, I want you to pay careful attention to the when and where. The specific literary techniques and word choice the author uses often tell us more about this. So those 5 W's are just the surface level. Now, going in depth, we have to start looking at how the author illustrates this using the techniques. Okay, sequencing plot. This is often a test question where they'll have a visual organizer of some nature, and you have to put the plot sequence in order by dragging and dropping. So you have to say what happened first, what happened second, what happened third. It may be helpful when you're reading to, next to the paragraphs, jot down what the main idea is. Okay, characters. The protagonist is the lead character. In films, this is often a hero, but that's not necessarily the case in most literature or nearly all informational texts. The antagonist provides conflict in regards to the protagonist. Sometimes a villain, but it's just conflict. It could also be a romantic rival or something of that nature. Okay, be mindful of bizarre characters. Sometimes the test will try and trip you up by putting in characters from Saki, Kafka, or Gogol. The reason I mention this is this often confuses students. These stories of Saki are written from the perspective of a cat. These stories of Kafka, some of them are from very bizarre perspectives. One of them is written from the perspective of a man who turns into a cockroach. Gogol is a Russian surrealist. He wrote a story where a man turns into a nose. I forget if they explain it or not, but just be mindful if something's very strange. Occasionally, if it's one of those, it could be that. On the GED, you will often be asked to infer a character's feelings or complete a word map. When we do guided practice number 1, the Mishavisham exercise from Great Expectations, we're going to talk about character and setting some more. A word map is what I'm showing you right now. It's a type of visual organizer often used on the exam, usually used for describing a character. In the center, with generally the biggest bubble, is going to be the character's name. They may fill in some of these descriptive terms. They may not. They may say, what are some adjectives that are words that describe something that describe this character? So it may say, this character is lonely, sad, perplexed. So you'd fill that in. I'm going to have you think a little bit more about that when we get to Pip in Great Expectations. All right, inferences and relationships. Think as if you were the character, narrator, or author, not yourself. This is very important. I can't reinforce this enough. Sometimes people come to the test and they bring their own personal biases and expectations. What emotions might they feel? It's about them. It's not about you. Or how they could be described. Think about that word map. Keep track of relationships such as family members. This is very important. The test will often ask, how is so-and-so related? So you have to think, are they an aunt? Are they an uncle? Go look back at the text. Are they living with them? Are they an adopted son or daughter? Use context clues. Those are the surrounding words and guesswork. So to help resolve the unclear vocabulary, settings, and relationships, or occasionally borrowed or foreign words, especially Native American. The test has a thing where they like informational texts and passages that have to do with Native American persons, and sometimes they may include a terminology from one of these Native American languages. No one knows what that means unless they're Native American, so you have to figure it out from the other words around it. Okay, so guided practice 1 is going to be from that Dickens piece I mentioned from Great Expectations, and we're going to look at settings and character. In-depth number 1, which again is optional, but if you don't do that well on guided practice 1, I'd strongly recommend, will be about the monkey's paw and context clues, sequence, and inferences. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about foreshadowing, irony, pathetic fallacy. These generally aren't on the exam much, but let's go into them. Okay, foreshadowing, an event can be used to anticipate a later event or action. An example is, it was a dark and stormy night. That means you can anticipate later on, well, maybe bad things are going to happen. Irony, an event or its results do not match expectations, often in a humorous or striking way. The stories of O. Henry illustrate this, and I'd recommend you read them if you get the chance. They're excellent. But there's 3 kinds of irony. Dramatic irony, you, the audience, know something the characters don't. The Titanic is going to sink. The characters in Titanic didn't know that, but you do. Situational irony, what is expected to happen and what happens. They're at odds with each other. So if you expect someone to get bonked in the head, and then it turns out they're an eloquent professor, like, one of the Three Stooges says something profound, that's situational irony. Verbal irony is wordplay at odds. A character called Lucky who bad things happen to. Okay, it's wordplay. Not irony is anything that happens in that Alanis Morissette song. It has nothing to do with irony. Please don't think about that when you think about irony. Some of you young folks may be wondering what I'm talking about. There was a song in the 1990s by a female artist named Alanis Morissette that was called Ironic, and nothing in the song is ironic. Pathetic fallacy. Nature reflects the character's moods. This happens in the film Body Heat, or if you're familiar with the video game Max Payne, and it happens in the stories of Philip Marlowe, who wrote a lot of detective stories. What this means is basically the environment and what's going on around with the weather usually reflects the character's emotions. Okay, dialogue and dialect. What is dialogue? Okay, dialogue is a literary form in which 2 or more parties engage in discussing, signified by quotation marks. 2 people are talking. Dialect is a specific kind of dialogue where characters' dialogue is written how they would pronounce it. Okay? So what can dialogue tell us about characters? How? It can tell us their origins, where they're from. Okay? So I'm going to give you 2 examples, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. "Ah," said the girl, "but you see she don't." One more. Its other name was Satis, which is Greek or Latin or Hebrew or all three or all one to me for enough. Okay? That's from Great Expectations, a serving girl. And one of the things you'll notice is maybe you're familiar with the English dialect, maybe not, but I would recommend you watch Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, or one of the Guy Ritchie films, to see some examples of dialect. Or you'll see some of it when we read that excerpt from Great Expectations. But we could tell, you might be able to tell where someone's from, maybe in England. You may be able to tell, since this female doesn't use proper grammar, that maybe she's less educated. She's confusing Greek, Latin, or Hebrew, which the other people around her might not. So we know her educational status may be less. We know various things, okay? When we say, there's a Led Zeppelin song, that's another example of dialect, Jamaica. And with an English accent, it sounds like Jamaica. It's actually a pun. And that means something different than, they're saying, did you sleep with her? Do you make her? Whereas it sounds like Jamaica. So they did a reggae song. But that's an example of dialect that you may all be familiar with if you're in my age group. You younger folks may not have heard it, but it was actually sampled on some popular records, including the Sean Kingston had a song where he sampled this. So you may actually know it from that. Okay? And I'll see you next time.